Welcome to the VTCLA Podcast, everyone. My guest today is Israel Provoncha. It goes by Izzy. He is a teacher and a member of the Vermont 250th Anniversary Commission and is here to talk to us about the fact that we have a very, very big anniversary coming and how it can impact Vermont education. Izzy, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it as well.
Start please by just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you have, your journey to your current roles.
Sure. I guess, well, I'm a born and raised Vermonter, seventh generation, originally from Madison County. And I went to UVM. I took a few years off. My route was not a direct one to education, but it's something I always aspired to be part of. And I got my first job in 2009 at Hartford High School, which is where I currently am still, although there has been a transition there in between. And that was in the days when teachers were on high. It was a very competitive market, and one of the things that I was told that stood out was my reenacting, which is a nice transition into not only why I'm dressed like this, but also um, how I became on the 250th Commission. So I've been a historical reenactor for 28 years, which is it's crazy to say that at this point in my life. I started when I was a 16-year-old in high school, and I've been part of that ever since. So specifically doing the American Revolution. So that's kind of always been part of my identity and my interests. I grew up 20 minutes from Crown Point, 45 minutes from Fort Ticonderoga. So those places were in my backyard, and I went to those places when I was a kid. I have distinct memories of that. And long story short, the major kind of historical reenactment in the state of Vermont is at Hubbardton, which is the only battle fought on Vermont soil. The Battle of Bennington was fought in New York. And so that's been an event that I've attended for 25 straight years now. And the woman who runs that historic site, she's a wonderful person by the name of Elsa Gilbertson. And when news of the 250th Commission, was kind of it was being spoken of, she said, "Well, I really think that you should apply because not only are engaged in Vermont history and love this stuff, but you're also a teacher. So I think it'd be perfect." And kind of the rest is history. So I'm technically the reenactor liaison to the 250th. That's actually my official role, and I've been kind of thrust upward, I guess.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for, as you said, dressing for the job you want, not the one you have. So that's a fascinating history. 16 years old, you started. What got you into that at 16?
Well, that actually ties nicely into the conversation about somebody who's influenced me, which is a teacher. Um, I had a teacher, and again, this is one of those things. Now I'm a teacher. It was a brilliant move. We were doing the Constitutional Convention. She made me George Washington. And the reason why it's a brilliant move is because that's a position that has lots of prestige, but you don't actually do anything. So, so it's like, and I got really into that, and we all dressed up and all that stuff. And actually, one of the teachers at the school was a historical reenactor, and she said, "Hey, you seem to be really into this. Why don't you go talk to him?" And kind of the rest is history. So.
Oh, that's great. So tell us a little bit about the commission for those who don't know much about it. My understanding is in 2020, Governor Scott um, formed this commission. And so you can please tell me its genesis and its purpose and how it branches into Vermont education potentially.
Sure. So, as you said, it was created through an executive order by Governor Scott in December of 2020. It consists of 15 members. There are a wide variety of people from different organizations in Vermont. So we have, the director of the Vermont Historical Society. We had at the time the head of the history department at UVM, the person in charge of Vermont Humanities. So it's a wide variety of people. It was born, from what I understand, is through some advocacy from some people who saw that the 250th was on the horizon and really wanted Vermont to take part of that. And as it turns out, we were actually fairly ahead of the ball. A lot of 250th state commissions are, some of them have just recently met for the first time. So yeah, our mission is basically to use history in the past and to impart to inspire and to build communities and strong communities in the future. So that's kind of like the broad mission statement. So being able to tell the story of Vermont and our experience in the revolution and kind of use that to build community. So the commission itself is not a top down organization in the sense that we're not necessarily planning events. We're not necessarily even organizing events, but our job is to kind of support and encourage 250th programming. So it's kind of more of an overarching organization where more grassroots organizations can take part and be supported, whether that's through money, through social media, stuff of that nature. So we definitely support and encourage 250th planning. And it's divided into, there are 6 subcommittees. Some of them, there's an executive committee. Each committee is chaired by a commissioner, which is my role. I'm the commissioner. I'm the chair of the Education and Teacher Outreach Committee. And then within that committee, there's a variety of different stakeholders. So within our education committee, we have the education outreach director from Fort Ticonderoga. We have the education outreach person from the Vermont Historical Society. My co-chair, Martha Dice, who is part of the Agency of Education, or vice chair. So we have somebody within the state, within the AOE. So we have a variety of different people who have interest in not only the 250th, but also education as a whole, which is great. And they're a great group of people.
Thanks. So as we approach that year of 250, and I'm an educator, what are some of the things I could be leveraging in terms of celebrating and studying the anniversary? And you, as the educational outreach person, here's an opportunity to talk to our members about the possibilities.
Sure. So one of the words that we're using is commemoration. So for the reason that a lot of these events were not always a celebration for certain individuals. So part of our lens is to be kind of more inclusive in our perspective, because the revolution itself was not necessarily positively experienced by everybody. And so we're trying to, and we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more, but trying to think about a variety of different people and how they experienced it and how that's a shared kind of experience. So for different things, again, much like I had suggested before, the 250th Commission is not necessarily a top-down organization. So we have not created like curriculum that you have to follow or anything like that. The first stop, I think, for any curriculum director that's interested in this stuff is to the website. So we have a 250th website that's it's still pretty fresh. It just started recently and it's gradually being populated, but you can find there is a education tab that has links to resources, so as well as there's an events tab and stuff of that nature. Other things that we have done, we have worked collectively to create what we call the framework of resources. And so what that has, we actually have four themes that we're kind of looking at this commemoration through those lenses, and a lot of them, they're intentionally broad. So you can bring in or think about both the past, the present, and the future in terms of your thinking of how these events affect us and continue to affect us. And all those can be found on the website. But we have a framework of resources, and the reason I bring that up is because that is divided by grade band as well as theme. So each different levels there's connected to different websites with lesson plans that are not necessarily generated by the 250th Commission itself, but Fort Ty, the Vermont Historical Society. We also we've created a book list. So there's a book list for further education. So that book list is both one for adults And so there's a fiction aspect to that, and there's also a nonfiction component as well for younger kids. So there's a variety of different levels to engage both historically and historic fiction. And the other thing that we've worked on with the Vermont State Librarian, she's also a commissioner, and there is actually an interlibrary loan system. So the state of Vermont has purchased a variety of books that local libraries within the state of Vermont library network can receive, including school libraries. So those are kind of interesting opportunities. The Vermont Most people are probably familiar with Vermont History Explorer, which is the education website as part of the Vermont Historical Society, and that has a very specific tab for 250th material as well. And so there's a lot of different things there. The what I think I forgot what they're called, this days in history or this place in history, where there all of those are categorized by 250th themes. So there's lots of great stuff there. The Vermont History Center itself, like that physical location, is also working towards you can visit, and they have 250 themed um, displays, artifacts, stuff of that nature. Other things that are happening that are really neat. One of the things that we hear a lot, because we've done a variety of listening sessions, and is, while my town didn't participate, my town didn't, and that's true, but the majority of Vermont towns experienced the revolution in some way, shape, or form. I would dare say, and this may be an audacious thing to say, but I dare say that almost every single town in the state of Vermont has at least one Revolutionary War veteran buried in it. So there's stories to be told there, which I think is kind of interesting. So doing local history, I live in Tunbridge, and we're kind of unique in that the famous raid of 1780 took a lot of part. A large part of it took place in Tunbridge, but even outside of that, there's still people moving and living in that space long before the raid and also during the revolution. So, depending on where you are. And the reason why I'm thinking about that is because Bennington has been doing a lot of things. So there's some information. We have a slideshow that has all these links, by the way, that so people, if you want to share out. But Bennington is doing a variety of different activities, including coloring books for smaller children, field trips, stuff of that nature. Other things that we've been connecting with is just general professional development opportunities for teachers. So we have an event coming up in 2 weeks, February 4th, through Fort Ticonderoga. So we're working with Fort Ticonderoga to offer some professional development. Fort Ty has been doing a lot of good stuff. They have Fort Ticonderoga Tuesdays, so they're offering a lot of content, information. Fort Ty is an excellent resource. Other things are, of course, the historic sites themselves. So we have a lot of 18th century historic sites that can be utilized and visited, whether that's Chimney Point, Hubbardton, but also other ones that are directly connected or not quite directly connected with the Revolution. The other thing that we have been recently, Jay Craven just produced a movie called Lost Nation, and so it's a pretty interesting movie that covers, well, it kind of tells two parallel stories. One is that of Ethan Allen and kind of his adventures, and the other is of the Prince family, which is a Black family who are experiencing the revolution. So, and how those two stories are kind of paralleling and to some extent overlapping. And Jay has offered to show, or is willing to show, the movie in high schools, so, or schools in general. May not quite content wise be okay for the littlest of kids, but so he comes and visits. So he talks about the movie, he talks about the history, he talks about his inspirations. And so that's all great stuff. And then the other thing that we've started to put together is actually a list of living historians within the state of Vermont. So actually having a reenactor come and visit your classroom. So then that's kind of a lot of hands-on history. So tangible things to touch, fires to make, muskets to be held, stuff of that nature. So we have a variety of different, hopefully a wide variety of different opportunities and information that curriculum directors can potentially pass on to their educators.
Yeah, that is a multitude of resources. That's great. And one of the things we'll do make that website available to all of our members soon. Um, and the Jay Craven thing sounds great as well. What I'd like to give you a chance to talk about a little bit is, since you are an historian and a historical reenactor, can you just talk a little bit, briefly, about Vermont's experiences and contributions during that time? And thanks for drawing that distinction between celebration and commemoration. It's important. It's an important acknowledgement that not everybody's experiences were in the celebratory category. But yeah, just maybe a couple of highlights to kind of wet our whistle about Vermont's role.
Sure, absolutely. So the state of Vermont, I should have mentioned this earlier, but the state of Vermont's commemoration is from 2025 to 2027. And so that is the beginning. So the war is going to begin in April of 2025 at Lexington and Concord. And that's going to carry us through the Burgoyne campaign of 1777 and Vermont independence. Yeah, brevity's never been my strength, especially when it comes to history. So yeah, so in terms of Vermont, as many people know, was disputed between New Hampshire and New York. And that's where you see the formation of the Green Mountain Boys, which is a vigilante organization that's fighting for settlers' rights, specifically through the lens of New Hampshire. And basically what it boils down to, that's been going on since the 1760s in Vermont, Bennington being the first chartered town in 1749, so even earlier. And basically as the revolution erupts, they, specifically the Green Mountain Boys and these people who are fighting the tyranny of New York, take up the mantle of independence. And again, I can talk about why New York's tyrannical, but there might be, anyway. And so the first victory of the American Revolution is, of course, the taking of Fort Ticonderoga. So Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys famously row across Lake Champlain in the middle of the night and take Fort Ti, 84 guys versus 29, but who's counting? But it's, Fort Ti is a very large, it's one of the largest forts in North America. And it was taken essentially without a shot being fired. And Vermonters are Vermonters are rowing from Vermont to Ti and New York to do that. And then, of course, what happens is, well, there's lots of things that happen, but basically the Lake Champlain corridor specifically is a major theater of war, as it was in the previous war. And they know that. So they begin to fortify and plan, in theory, an invasion. There is an invasion stage to Canada, which is completely unsuccessful, but there's a whole story behind that too. And the British come, and they try, famously in 1776, and they're unsuccessful at Valcour Island, and they turn back in October of 76. In the meantime, Mount Independence is created. So Mount Independence, which is on the Vermont side. And then, of course, the kind of the big cataclysmic, I guess, event is Burgoyne's invasion of 1777. That will create he will basically steamroll down the lake, take Fort Ticonderoga without firing a shot, catch up with the rebels at Hubbardton, where the famous battle happens, and then eventually his supply lines will become too extended. He will go to Bennington. Well, he'll send a force to Bennington, which is defeated, and that culminates with, of course, the victory at Saratoga, which is the turning point of the war. The French will enter shortly thereafter, and the nature of the war changes significantly. And then, of course, what will happen after that, which the state of Vermont's not necessarily commemorating, is there's going to be raids that are going to happen both in the Champlain Valley and in the White River Valley, which will be in the 1770s, later 1770s and 1780s.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating and helpful. Do you want to share Ethan Allen, of course? How about some other figures who were significant players from Vermont during this time?
Yeah, so one of the more interesting stories about Ethan Allen is the Green Mountain Boys joined the war effort formally. And what I mean by that is join the Continental Army, ironically under the state of New York, that's again another story for another day. And they actually had a vote between Ethan Allen and this other gentleman named Seth Warner, and Seth Warner is going to win. significantly, which I think is really an interesting historical moment, which is covered in Jay Craven's film as well. So Seth Warner is kind of a famous, I would argue, a more famous and more important figure in the revolution, because Ethan Allen is basically going to try to single-handedly invade Canada by himself and spend the next 3 years in jail in England. Um, but other people, of course, famously John Stark, who is, although not a Vermonter, he's from New Hampshire, and he will be the hero of the Battle of Bennington. And then, of course, Allen has a litany of relatives, some of which are kind of famous, including Remember Baker. So yeah, Warner's regiment. And there's a whole variety of different people, but those are kind of the main ones that are maybe overlooked often by because of Ethan Allen.
Thank you. So we've got the 250, we've got all these opportunities to look back and examine where our country's been. Vermont, really, in the educational world, faces some pretty monumental challenges right now, as I'm sure you know. Uh, Governor Scott yesterday shared his vision for some significant shifts in how we finance and how we organize and how we have governance over our educational system in Vermont. So as we think about what's next, how can studying the past, especially through the lens of the 250th anniversary, provide context and lessons that we can apply to our current circumstances and our future circumstances?
Sure, I think knowing the past is knowing oneself. So I think that is true about an individual. I think that's true about a community. I think that's true about a state, and I think that's true about a nation. And so the obviously the revolutionary period is this very formative period, and it's a radical period where people are truly challenging social norms. And by that I mean, like, they're implementing democracy on a pretty radical scale, where they're rejecting a lot of the customs of the old world and doing things like voting for their officers, and that's kind of, there's strengths and weaknesses to that, and trying these experiments. And so I think that what the lessons can be learned, I think there's a couple of things. Is one is that, the as I suggested before, the revolution didn't affect everybody the same way. So if you're a person of color, if you're an indigenous person, your experiences of that revolution is not necessarily as positive, although in some cases it can be. And I think that the idea that I like to think a lot about is this idea of unfilled revolutions. So what are some promises that were made back then that have not been fulfilled? And I think a lot of that, we see that in a variety of different ways. And I think that a healthy democracy is born out of a shared understanding of the past. And I think when we have a shared understanding of what we were fighting for, what freedom means, how it looks for a variety of different people, including those who are marginalized, then I think that leads to healthy democracies, civic engagement, which I think is hugely important. And I think putting value into education as not only a key to teaching those principles, but also um, of kind of learning how to be a small d Democrat. We're blessed to live in a state where, although civic engagement is clearly in decline, it's still fairly robust compared to the rest of the world. It's we So I live in Tunbridge. I'm our town moderator. I'm on the historical society, and we're in the planning commission, and we're doing a volunteer fair. And within the little town of Tunbridge, with, I don't know how many people we have, 1,700 people, we have 60 organizations that range, from a conservation commission to, neighbors helping neighbors and everything in between. So I think that not only can we use the past to kind of seek inspiration, I also think that we have a good foundation and a good start where specifically with civic engagement can be kind of promoted as it was back then, because there's truly a period where there's very radical experiments going on in democracy, and they get kind of boiled down with the Constitution a little bit, and maybe some of the legs taken out. But it's kind of interesting that those ideas are still, I still think they deeply influence who we are. I'm just not sure we always articulate that as much as we realize.
Yeah, thanks. It's some fascinating points about the civic engagement piece, and that your your point about it having changed over the years and feeling um, less inviting and yet still robust compared to many other societies. Just before we go to the last piece, I want to just kind of pick up on that. Um, can you share some of your own perspective about um, how do we civically engage our students in a way that invites debate and conversation without it requiring that you stake a position and isolate yourself within that position, which is so easy to do nowadays.
I think, well, I'm a fan of place-based learning. So I think I teach a class called Learning Through Place, which really the whole idea is to get kids into their communities to experience those things. And I think that's one is to talk about things not in abstract terms, but in terms that affect everyday. And again, my lens is always high school, so I have to temper what I'm saying with that. So getting kids to engage with their communities and understanding the experience, how these things affect their communities. And I think the other is kind of more of an inquiry based model where kids ask questions. So, so thinking about, Governor Scott's new plan, taking that back to the students and saying, well, how do you think this is going to affect us? How do you think it's going to affect your community, our school, and getting them to start to think about those things and ask those questions. And I think once they see, I think it's very easy nowadays, especially with social media, to kind of live abstractly and outside of your community in many ways, especially because most communities are commuter communities and stuff of that nature. So I think having kids kind of ask those hard questions and really trying to learn how those things affect us, how those things will play out, and in essence, making an informed decision based on that experience, I think is a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we have a tradition with this podcast to end by allowing the guests to shout out someone or a few folks who have been pivotal in their development. You've already alluded to this person, but now it's a chance to share a little bit more about the person who's been pretty influential in your own development.
Yeah. So my person's a woman by the name of Kristen Farrell. She, I don't, I mean, it's been so many years now. She may not teach there anymore, but she taught at Mount Abraham. And again, I was at 15. I was like many 15-year-olds, listless, just not very engaged. And that moment with the Constitutional Convention is a huge moment in my life. So I definitely, it's why I'm a teacher. It's why I'm a 250th commissioner. So a lot of I get emotional. A lot of my life experiences are associated with that person.
Thank you. And thanks for demonstrating the power of the people in our field, the power they have.
Yeah, to me, it's a tsunami, and that's the way I look at education. Is that when every day when we're in the trenches, it's very hard to know what impact we're having. Some days it feels like we're not having any impacts, but maybe, just maybe, there's a little, that tsunami when it starts in the middle of the ocean, it's a small bump, but when it hits the shore, and that's kind of the way I think about it. So
yeah. Well, thank you. I can't think of a better way to end our conversation. I appreciate it. And shout outs to your mentor. And thanks for taking the time and dressing the part as well for those of us who will watch this podcast. And also, anything that you want to share with me, I will then add into the link to the podcast itself. So thanks for taking this time today, Izzy. Good luck. And I hope that our members and many educators will access some of the resources you shared here today and make it a really rich experience over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity.